court is now back in session, and we would like to hand over to the prosecution to proceed with their questions, if they would wish to do so, to the civil party. Mr. Chandara Samai. Thank you, Mr. President, and Your Honors. To save time and without further ado, we already discussed with the prosecutors that the prosecutor will be putting questions, but only one person representing the prosecution putting questions to the civil party, and I will be the one who is making or putting these questions.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Civil Party, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your past and more specifically about the evacuation of Phnom Penh and your travel to your village. My first question is to ask, as of when did you work as a soldier in the army of the Khmer Republic? Yes, you said just now that you were enlisted under Lon Nol.
Response. Thank you, Mr. Co-Prosecutor. I worked as a soldier starting from 1972, perhaps in September, all the way until Phnom Penh broke.
Merci.
Thank you. And which particular division or unit were you working in at that stage?
Response. I was under the aviation or the Air Force unit. It's Battalion 3, Company 3, stationed at the airport, currently the Phnom Penh International Airport.
Merci.
Thank you. I believe I heard this morning that you said that your father and yourself, a London soldier, were dressed in civilian clothes when the Khmer Rouge came to Phnom Penh in 1975. Was that on purpose?
Response. The reason I dressed in civilian clothes, because a few days after the fall of Phnom Penh, we retreated and I had to flee, and being afraid that the Khmer Rouge would know that I worked as a soldier, I had to remove my military uniform and dressed in civilian clothes.
Merci.
Thank you. Now, I heard a few days after the fall of Phnom Penh, but I would assume that you really meant a few days before the fall of Phnom Penh. Can you just confirm that for me?
Response. Could you repeat that question again?
Oui, vous avez.
Yes. In the translation that I heard in French, you took off your uniform because a few days after the fall of Phnom Penh, you were fleeing the advances of the Khmer Rouge forces. Now, I think that we're talking about a few days before and not after. Can I therefore assume that there was an error in the translation?
Response. I wore civilian clothes on the morning of the 17th of April 1975, just a few hours before the Khmer Rouge captured Phnom Penh.
Merci. Est-ce que
Thank you. As a cautionary measure, did you do other things apart from hiding your uniform? Did you, for example, take care to conceal or destroy any kind of documents or evidence that might have established that you were, in fact, enlisted as a soldier under Lon Nol?
Response. Yes, I did. I fled with my gun and an M16 rifle from my friend. I had to have them buried along with the handgun belonged to my father, and some of the uniforms had to be taken off, and I could manage to bring just a pair of uniform with me, but then the Khmer Rouge spotted them and asked to have them. They did not do anything to me except asking for the uniform.
Merci.
Thank you. Which units of the Khmer Rouge troops came into Borikela on that day in April 1975? Do you know which regiment it was?
Response. I'm afraid I don't know, but I know for sure that they were from the east.
Merci.
Thank you. This morning you talked about sporadic gunfire that you heard and grenade and rocket explosions during the morning before the Khmer Rouge actually got into Phnom Penh. Can you tell us if there was also fighting when they came into the town? Was there resistance to the Lon Nol by the Lon Nol forces, or did they simply give up there and then?
Response. So far as I saw, there was no fighting because the Lon Nol soldiers already surrendered their arms. I could see their weapons were stacking on the roadsides, and they were told by the Phnom Penh dwellers that they had to discard their weapons, and they listened. Many of them had to remove their uniforms and disarm, and there was no fighting, although every now and then there would be a kind of bombs dropped by the Khmer Rouge.
Vous avez
This morning you said you saw corpses along route number 4 coming out of Phnom Penh as you went towards Pochentong Airport, often illuminated by car headlights. Now, between Borikela and the airport, did you also notice other corpses?
Response. I only saw the corpses just across from the airport and near Kampong Tul. In front of the airport, it used to be the battlefield. The fierce fightings happened there, and the Lono soldiers at the vicinity were defeated, and many were killed by the Khmer Rouge soldiers. And I could see their bodies lying inside the military base. And when we were traveling, I could also see more bodies, and it is obvious that these people died because they were in the strong battlefields.
Thank you. Just now, you said that when the Khmer Rouge came into Phnom Penh, the population demonstrated a certain elation. On the other side of Phnom Penh, or rather on the other side, did the forces themselves share some joy with the local population?
Response. The Khmer Rouge soldiers were of fierce facial impressions. One, we could see that parts of their pants were rolled up, and they walked and appealed to the public, and they were very firm in their expression, so they did not show any kind of joyful moment, and they did not share such a joy, and they even shot at people right in front of me, those who came to get the rice.
Were the people wounded by the Khmer Rouge after they had broken into Phnom Penh?
Response. Some were wounded and killed because the people tried to loot the rice stored in the warehouse, and they were met by the forces, and a lot of people who had been trying to go into the warehouse to loot the rice were then shot at. Many got injured and died, and I could get a sack of rice and ran away with it.
From what you saw of the attitude of the Khmer Rouge when they came into the city and their rapport with the population that was receiving them so joyously, would you say that they were pretty mistrustful vis-à-vis the population, or simply rather reserved?
Response. The people of Phnom Penh and those who lived in my location were not trusted by the Khmer Rouge. We had already been regarded as enemies all along, and they did not manage or did not wish to contact with us at all.
When you said that they didn't want any kind of contact, we were considered as enemies. Are you talking about the entire population of Phnom Penh or certain segments of that population?
Response. I am referring to all the people in Phnom Penh. We were regarded as enemies, those who still had some influence of the imperialists, American imperialists.
Est-ce qu'on vous...
Were you given any details about why you were thought of as enemies? Did the Khmer Rouge give any explanation about that?
Response. It was a general regard. They treated us as enemies. First, they only presumed that we were enemies, but if we committed any small wrongdoing, then we were really enemies, or the internal enemies, as they claimed.
Thank you. This morning you told us that at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 17th of April 1975, the Khmer Rouge announced that there was nothing to be afraid of, that you could continue with your jobs and occupations, and that Angkar would only be going after the 7 traitors. Had you already heard about these 7 traitors before the Khmer Rouge came into Phnom Penh?
Response. Yes, I had, but I do not recollect all the names, although I still remember that they were people like Intam, Serik Cheng Heng, Lonal, and a few others that I cannot recall.
Et comment...
And how did you hear about this idea of the 7 traitors before the 17th of April 1975? Did you hear about them on the radio? And if so, on what radio channel? Or if not, through what particular means did you hear about that?
Response. Can you please repeat the question? Are you asking me whether I heard about this from the Khmer Rouge or from the Lonal side?
No. Did you hear it from the Khmer Rouge, but before the 17th of April 75, for example, through radio stations that you received in Phnom Penh, or did you only hear about the whole concept after the 17th of April?
Response. I heard about this through radio broadcasts because I tune into the Khmer Rouge radio broadcast, and every now and then I would hear those names being read out on the broadcasts.
Merci. Alors...
Thank you. There is one thing I want to be clear about. Just now you were talking about the fact that at 9 o'clock the Khmer Rouge announced that only the 7 traitors would be pursued, and then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon you heard that you had to evacuate the city. Now, can you confirm those two times? Because in the French transcript there may be a translation mistake, so I just need to be sure about this. So tell us at what moment the Khmer Rouge were talking about the traitors, and at what time precisely they were saying that Phnom Penh had to be evacuated.
Response. At about 3 p.m., we heard from the announcement that people had to leave Phnom Penh for 3 days, because if we didn't do so, we would be bombed by the Americans.
Merci.
Thank you. This morning you said that apart from the threat of US bombing, Ankara had also said that the city needed to be cleansed of its enemies. Now, when you were talking about this, were you referring to the entire population or specific enemies of Ankara?
Response. Through the announcements, we heard in general about the enemies, and this term did not refer particularly to the soldiers.
When the Khmer Rouge broadcast the order to evacuate the city in order to avoid bombing by the US, did you feel, and your family feel, that that was a credible justification for the evacuation?
Response. No, it wasn't entirely the case. However, we knew that the Khmer Rouge were very determined, and when they said something, they meant it. They had been fighting to free us from the war and asking us to leave the city for 3 days, so for us it was not a big deal.
Est-ce que l'attitude
When the Khmer Rouge came into the city, did you feel that their attitude and the way in which they gave that order left you with any choice about staying or leaving?
Response. I was too young, but I could rely on the decision made by my father and grandparents, and they chose to leave as been ordered. So as a young obedient kid, I had to follow my parents and grandparents wherever they went.
Did you see or hear any city dwellers in Phnom Penh disputing the order to evacuate by saying, for example, that they were ready to run the risk of being bombed by the Americans? Were there any scenes of that kind, or did you leave too soon to witness anything of that sort?
Response. As I stated this morning, from 3 p.m. until the time I left was a short period of time, and my parents and family had means to leave the city as quick as possible. So we left too soon to witness such a thing, and our family had to be ahead during the evacuation, and by the time we reached one destination, only the few hours later or the next morning that we saw more people kept coming in.
Est-ce qu'à un moment,
At any stage in the evacuation and during your subsequent travels, did you see any former Lon Nol soldiers wearing their uniform, going on their journeys unimpeded, or were the only ones you saw the ones you saw? You mentioned just now saying that they were tied with their hands behind their backs and walking in double file.
I saw people who were tied up. That was the once incident that I witnessed. There were no Lon soldiers wearing the military uniforms walking among the people, but there were, of course, Lon soldiers walking amongst the people wearing civilian clothes. Au moment où l'ordre a été donné d'évacuer,
At the time the order was issued that the town be evacuated, did you and your family members fear the orders that were issued?
yes, we feared intensely, and we kept silent during our journey, and we only asked when we were really wondering a lot about something. My uncle Mir used to live in the liberated zone for a few years, and that he was wanted, and then he fled to the Lon Nol side and then became a Lon Nol military officer, and his biography was learned, and then they were seeking for him again. And we talked about amongst our families members and others tried to avoid him being persecuted by the Khmer Rouge. Merci. Juste pour clarifier.
Thank you. Please clarify this for me. During the trip, did you travel with your Uncle Mikt, or he had gone before you on his way to your native village?
My uncle, after avoiding the arrest at Kampong Tul, he joined us and his wife on the trip to the Angkruj Pagoda, where we stayed, as my younger sister could not walk, but he did not wait for us, so he went ahead with his wife. I also would like to add that I had another younger uncle by the name of Mut, and he used to work for the Khmer Rouge as well. but then he fled to come and live in Phnom Penh. So he knew a lot about the Khmer Rouge.
Au moment de quitter Phnom Penh,
At the time you left Phnom Penh, at the time of the order for the evacuation, did the Khmer Rouge give you any information as to the personal effects you could take along with you, knowing that you were to be away for 3 days? Were you told to take as much personal belongings as possible, or the minimum, or something between the two?
There was an announcement for us to leave and not to carry many belongings, that we should only carry minimum belonging, as we only had to leave for 3 days and then we had to return. That was a public announcement to that effect.
pour bien comprendre la logique des...
To properly understand the logic of the Khmer Rouge, if indeed the Americans were threatening to bomb the town, to destroy the town and your homes, did you ask yourself whether it was logical to take the minimum, whereas your houses were perhaps going to be destroyed?
I thought about that. Actually, a fortnight before the fall of Phnom Penh, there was a U.S. plane. It dropped some food for the people who were circled by the Khmer Rouge forces near the outskirts of Phnom Penh. And I did not believe that the U.S. planes would bombard Phnom Penh when Phnom Penh fell, because they only recently just dropped food for the people in Phnom Penh. That was how I thought at the time.
On vous a dit d'abord que vous partiez pour 3 jours.
You were initially told that you were going to be away for 3 days, and finally you were told that you would be away for 7 days. This morning, I also understood that the Khmer Rouge told you to go back to your villages of origin. Was it possible for you to get to your native villages in 3 days or in 7 days on foot?
When we were told to leave for 3 days, actually it passed 3 days already, as when we rested at Ang Krui Pagoda, it was either on the 3rd or on the 4th days already, as we had to wait for my younger sister to have recovered from her swollen legs. And then we were instructed not to stay but to move, to return to our native village.
Merci. Alors, quelques...
Thank you. I will now put a few questions to you regarding the organization of the evacuation by the new Khmer Rouge authority. Had the Khmer Rouge made provision for buses, taxis, or other means of transportation for those who had to leave Phnom Penh?
The leaving from Phnom Penh was done at own ability. When I arrived at Babaong commune at the Babaong Pagoda, there was a vehicle which was captured by the Khmer Rouge soldiers, and we were transported on that vehicle to Sam Rao district. That was the only occasions that we were transported on that vehicle.
Est-ce que des endroits avaient été aménagés?
Had the Khmer Rouge prepared any venues where you could be housed during the journey at any point in time?
We decided to rest along the road by ourselves. Sometimes we had to stay at the entrance to the pagoda or sometimes under the tree. Nobody gave us specific instructions as to where we should gather and rest.
Merci. Est-ce que la mesure des...
Thank you. Was the measure for the evacuation of Phnom Penh also applicable to persons who are vulnerable and could not move about, such as the elderly, little children, or the sick and the hospitalized?
The elderly and the children, I hoped that they would be taken care of by their family members. But for the patients, nobody took care of them. They would stay there or they would die or they would bleed to death. Two of my relatives, my uncle and his wife, who were wounded, they had to stay on the mat on the day Phnom Penh fell. And they were abandoned. And I was told that they were gathered up and abandoned and taken away and left somewhere. But we did not know what happened or where they were thrown.
Ah. Merci. J'en viens à mes dernières questions.
Thank you. I am coming to my last questions before your arrival in Bang Day village. How many new people arrived in the village following the evacuation of Phnom Penh and other towns? Can you give us an approximate number of 17 April people who are in your village and in the surrounding villages?
There were several families of the 17 April people. I could not count them all. I only knew more about my family members and my relatives. It's been more than 30 years and I could not recall of how many families. And for the second movement, some other families were moved again from my village, including some family members on my wife's side. And one of my uncles, the uncles of my wife, found some excuses so that they were allowed to stay in the village.
Merci. À part votre père,
Thank you. Apart from your father and two uncles, who, as you say, were members of the Khmer Republican Army and who were arrested, were they among the persons evacuated from Phnom Penh who got to your village? Were there any other former Lon Nol soldiers who were arrested and who disappeared indefinitely?
There were several in my village. My father, my two uncles, my father-in-law and his younger brother. And there were 4 other individuals in my village as well. They were former soldiers.
merci.
Thank you. These are my very last questions. You stated a while ago that upon your arrival in your village, your family members and neighbors did not show sufficient friendship and love for you and your family members. Do you know why they were rather defiant towards you and your family members, your immediate family members?
As far as I knew, the 17th April people were considered the oppressing class, or the capitalist, or the feudalist, or the comprador class, and not loyal to the revolution, and that we were considered to exploit the people. Even at the best, they were categorized in various categories. They were considered the best people, the lower best people, for instance, because there were some Cambodian Chinese as well who were living in the base. They were part of the base people, but they had a lower class, and they were also monitored. As for the pure base people, they were those poor peasants, and they could not speak much. They only could speak that is or this is for that, for instance. And they were the poorest, and they were trusted, and they were promoted to be militia. So I repeat, even at the base level, there were various categories of those people, and the pure one, as I said, was the one who were absolute. And for other people who had a bigger house, then they would be required to dismantle half of their houses in order to build a shed or to build a warehouse for fertilizer. And for the other half-erected house, they had to manage amongst themselves to form a new house. So that's how people were categorized at the time.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le...
Thank you very much, Mr. Civil Party, for your very clear clarifications and your time. It would be very useful for the Chamber. Mr. President, I have no further questions for the Civil Party.
President, thank you. Next, the Chamber would like to give the floor to the defense teams, starting from Nunchi's defense, to put question to this civil party if you wish to do so.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have no questions for the civil party. Thank you, Mr. Civil Party, for coming to give your evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Counsel. Next, we'd like to give the floor to Ieng Sari's defense to put questions to this civil party if you wish to do so. And Mr. President, Jonas, and everyone, and good afternoon, Mr. Chum Sukha. I and my colleague, Michael Canavas, the defense lawyers for Ieng Sari, do not have any questions for you. We thank you and grateful for giving testimony to this court in order to ascertain the truth. Thank you, Mr. President. President, thank you. I'd like now to give the floor to Keel Sampon's defense to put question to this civil party if you wish to do so. Counsel, thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors. Good afternoon, everyone in and around the courtroom. On behalf of Keel Sampon, we, the defense team, do not have any question for this civil party. Thank you, Mr. President. President, thank you. Mr. Chum Sukha, as a civil party, you have the right to express your suffering that you have experienced during Democratic Cambodia regime, as we informed you this morning, and if you wish to do so. Chum Sukha. First of all, good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors. I'd like to describe the events that I experienced through the Khmer Rouge regime emotionally, physically, and materially. The reason for my submission of my application to the Khmer Rouge Tribunal is that my family members and myself suffered great loss and harm under the Khmer Rouge regime. We suffered physically from the beginning, that is, from the time that we left Phnom Penh. We used to live in a house, but then we were asked to leave and to live, to stay in the open. That was difficult. I was 20 years old at the time. I was rather mature, but I had my younger siblings and my grandparents. They suffered a great deal. It took us 1 month to walk on foot from Phnom Penh to the destination. So we suffered from the trip, suffered from, as we were deprived of proper sleeping place, food, as we had to find stones in order to make a stove for cooking, to find water to cook our food, and there was no proper food. We had to find crab in the rice field. And that was during the dry season, and it was very difficult to find crab. If we reach a lake or a pond, we try to find shell or some kind of food there. My younger sibling had her feet swollen, and we did not bring along any medicine, and there was no medic to treat her. So we had to try to find leaves, herbal leaves, to treat her swollen legs and feet. As for myself, I was forced to work day and night. I was forced to work from 12 to 14 hours per day. I was asked to make human fertilizer, to gather feces from a makeshift lavatory. It was fresh feces, and it was very stinging. And we were also asked to gather feces from old toilets, from old houses. And we had to carry that. We also had to carry urine as well. And I was asked to work on that for almost half a year. So every day I had to smell the stinging feces and urine, and my fingers and fingernails were stained with the feces and the urine. At that time there was no soap to properly clean the hands. We had to use the ashes, but the smell remained. We were also mistreated during working on that fertilizer. We were scolded that we were not loyal to Onka, that we could not stand the smell, and that we were not cleansed from the influence of the imperialists. Even when we used the scarf to cover our nose, we were criticized. They were so hard on us in this regard. And when I was sick, as I was contracted by malaria, usually I should be allowed to stay at home and rest. But no, I was asked to work in a rice field. So I was also asked to transport wood from Krobau, and I had to transport back 3 or 4 logs while I was still having malaria. It was so pitiful. The cart capsized a few times, so I had to put the logs back on the cart. These are just some of the points of my suffering under the regime. And I also was forced to engage in rice farming, all kinds of rice farming. And when I was sick, there was no medical treatment. And when I went to the herbal curer, I was only given a rabbit pellet to swallow. They used the spent gun shell as a mold, as they put this kind of rabbit pellet in it, and I was given that kind of tablet. However, later on I recovered, but I did not know what actually cured me, whether it's from that rabbit pellet or from the herbal medicine that I took. Even at present, I had problem with my liver and with my stomach. It could be the effect from that time. We were asked to make dike or to build dam as well, and we had to complete the daily quota of 2 to 3 cubic meters. And if we could achieve the 2 to 3 cubic meters per day, next day it would increase to 7 to 5 cubic meters, and next day it would be 7. The dam was high and wide, so we tried very hard from dusk to dawn, and we were so fatigued. And when we finished in the late afternoon, we did not have rice to eat. We only had thick gruel with morning glory soup. We could only have 1 or 2 pieces of chicken or a few small fishes in a large pot of soup. I can recall that in 1976, Onka only gave us 1 corn per day as a food ration, and sometimes the food is so small and it is very difficult to fill our stomach from this small corn. So for each meal we only could eat half of the corn, and we worked very hard with this insufficient food. The situation was really horrible. My knees were larger than my head. Sometimes when I was plowing the rice field, I could hardly keep up with the cow's pace. And in the evening, during the meeting, we were asked to try to work hard to achieve the plan by Onka in a great leap forward fashion, that we should achieve the 3 tons per hectare plan and that we should progress better than the Onko period. And we were not allowed to find any other food besides the food ration given to us by Onka. But sometimes we had to force ourselves to find other things to eat to survive. Sometimes we had to eat tree leaves. We use the tree leaves to mix with the salt water, and we ate that. Actually, when we went to the kitchen, we asked them for some grains of salt, and we said the soup was not salty enough, but in fact we used it to mix with the tree leaves and ate the tree leaves. I was so skinny, and later my wife said, "How could I stay with you? You look like a very old, skinny old man." I was skinny and very old because of the lack of food. I was also asked to dig a canal at Damrai Poon. It was a 10-meter deep toward the head of the canal, and the canal was about 2 to 3 kilometers long. The people from the entire district were gathered up to dig the canal, and we were given 2 meals per day. And we started working from early morning up to 11. We had a rest, and we started again from 1 to 5. And later on, we had to work at night until 10 or 11. We were given rice at the time, but the soup was very watery. During the time that we dug the canal, the Onka made an announcement that we will be given 3 meals per day. That is the gruel in the morning, the rice for lunch, the rice for dinner, and every week we would have a dessert. But no, in fact, we only were offered 2 meals per day. And during the rainy season or transplanted season, we only had a watery gruel to eat. They did not care about our health, that we did not have enough food to eat. And on one day there was this party commemoration, and that was held during the Pchumban period, and Onka would cook dry rice, and then there would be pork and beef, and then there was a big meeting for us to attend. And after the conclusion of the meeting, we were allowed to go into the kitchen, and we tried to fill our stomach with the rice that we hardly ate and with the proper food. And we filled our stomach, but because we had never had a chance to eat that much, half of the villagers had diarrhea at night, and then we were accused that we pretended to be lazy, to be sick, rather than trying to treat us. We were accused of being lazy, that we had proper food to eat, and then that we had this diarrhea, and that we deserve to eat a watery gruel. The hard work in combination with the insufficient food led many of us to deteriorate in our health, and we did not have enough time to sleep, because at night we stopped working at 10 p.m. and by the time we returned to our house, wash ourselves. It was 11, and we had to wake up at 4 a.m. as the bell would be rang by that time. Some of us had to go to the field or to prepare the cows for the plowing. So we did not have enough time to sleep. And despite working that hard, we were still forced by Angkar to work harder and to love Angkar absolutely. But on the contrary, Angkar did not love us absolutely.
On top of this, I had suffered dearly when I was arrested and detained at a security center in Ba Phnom district. In captivity, I was shackled and my hands were bound behind my back, and I was interrogated. I had been left or abandoned for 3 days when the shackles were still on, the ties were still on after such interrogation, and no one could tell me anything why I had to remain like that. I asked the security guard about this, but I did not get response other than being beaten up. And during the interrogation, I would be beaten every now and then. After each question, I would be beaten. So I had been beaten all over my body except my back, and I did not commit any wrongdoing at all. I was just implicated in the event when Sao Pum had a problem, and I was just in the wrong time, at the wrong place at the wrong time, and I was detained along with my friend for 1 month. I was shackled for the entire period, and I finally couldn't stand no more, and I asked the security guard to allow me to work with other people instead of being shackled and kept in the detention facility for longer. So I can say that I have been mentally or psychologically and physically suffering from the harms, and I can't describe them all in my words how painful this ordeal was. And I at the same time been very saddened by the loss of my relatives, my father and my parents. Every time I think about them, I can't stop crying. If my father were to live until these days, none of my family member would have had so much difficulties in their life like this. My mother had been fragile emotionally by the loss of her husband, and I also have had a lot of problems mentally, having seen how my brothers and sisters living their poor life because we were not properly cared like what we were when our parents are still alive. To that effect, we were not properly educated. Even these days, I still see Khmer soldiers fighting with me, chasing me in my dreams, and I would wake up to the nightmare almost every night. I have been traumatized by the events. Every time I heard about the fighting, I would recollect the Khmer Rouge, the fighting during the Khmer Rouge time. I think I don't know how I can put all these suffering into words. When it comes to material harms, at the Kampong Day location, when I was there, people treated us badly because they regarded us as those who brought trouble, those who came to steal their food. And finally, they decided to send me for execution. But my grandfather could beg them to spare me, and luckily I was spared. Indeed, they say that we were there to destroy them, to bring hardship to them, and I left Phnom Penh with very little belongings. But the Khmer Rouge destroyed everything. I rose through different ranks in my capacity as a soldier, but the Khmer Rouge stole everything from me. And when I went to that location, as I indicated, they did not welcome us. After leaving our home, the only thing we knew was that we would never be back, and we have lost the property. And at a later date, when people return to the city, those who came to occupy our property would claim the ownership of the property, and we had no choice but to let it go. As to the living condition during that time, we had nothing but the very few wooden poles that we put together to form a bed where we could sleep at night. and after exposure to the sunlight and rains, these makeshift or improvised bed couldn't hold us no more, and later on we could manage to bring some trees to build a small hut, but the hut is or was not properly built, and we had to we had a lot of difficulties. And to conclude, I can say that because of the Khmer Rouge, I have lost almost everything. So finally, I would like to humbly request as follows. I would like the chamber to prosecute the former senior leaders of the Khmer Rouge who have inflicted tortures and mistreatment onto my families, and that they shall be punished to commensurate with their wrongdoings and crimes they have committed. And at the same time, I would like the chamber to investigate to see whether the accused person have any belonging or property, and that if so, we would like our councils to manage them so that they could also be returned to the victims. And finally, I would like to appeal to the chamber to make sure the trial proceedings are concluded completely and successfully. Thank you very much. The President mic is not activated. The President. Thank you very much, Mr. Chum Sokha. Your testimony has now come to an end and you are now excused. You may return to your home, and court officer is now instructed to assist with the vessel to make sure that Mr. Chum Sokha is returned home safe and sound. Mr. Chum Sokha, you may be let now out of this room by our court officer, and we thank you very much indeed for your time. The President, does any party to the proceedings wish to have any comment or to be heard? If not, then the Chamber would like to conclude the session now, and the next session will be resumed by tomorrow at 9 a.m. For tomorrow's sessions, the Chamber will be hearing the testimonies of TCCP 606. The questions to be put first by the lead co-lawyers for the civil party before other parties to the proceeding. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Nuanchie and Kyu Sampon back to the detention facility and have them return to the courtroom tomorrow before 9 a.m. The court is adjourned.
សូមក្រោកឈរ